Hello everybody, good afternoon. It's been a very, very long time since I've posted any kind of YouTube video, years to be exact, and I figured, well, why not restart the channel now that I actually kind of know what I want to do with it. So moving forward, and I don't know if anybody that used to watch my videos is even being notified that I've posted anything, but what I would like to do on this channel is to talk about, say, if I was advising any specific world leader in any kind of geopolitical situation, what would I advise that leader to do? Now, I have my own opinions on world events. I have my own, ideological bent, so to speak. But I think it'd be interesting to, go from situation to situation and world leader to world leader and, talk about what is in their best interests to do in any given situation, and if the objectives they want to achieve are even remotely possible. So let's start this off with one of the more prominent things in the news right now. It's the aftermath of the situation that happened at the White House a few days back. During a conversation that President Volodymyr Zelenskyy of Ukraine was having with the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. Now, the conversation went sideways. I think everybody saw what happened. Doesn't really seem necessary to go over what was said. I would say, in my personal opinion, I think Zelenskyy acted very unprofessionally on TV. I think if you're a world leader, you should hold yourself to certain standards. And if you're prone to become overly emotional in public, then that will be taken advantage of, or that will make people question your judgment. Now, behind closed doors, emotions and might run high and tempers might flare, but that's not something you want to do in front of a camera. It doesn't make you look passionate. It makes you look unhinged with poor judgment to most people anyways. Now moving forward, if I'll just go over, I'll talk about what I think Donald Trump should do, what I think President Zelenskyy should do, and I'll talk about what I think President Putin should do, and then the European leaders. Well, first let's talk about what I think Zelenskyy should do from here on out. If I was advising him, I'd say keep your mouth shut. You're in a very, very difficult situation militarily and economically. Unfortunately, if you look at the situation Ukraine finds itself in, and now this is from I'm a realist, so I'm not going to, I'm not one of those people that are going to sit here and champion any other country other than my own. I'm going to talk about the actual situation that they're in. I'm an American. I'm not a Ukrainian. I'm not a Russian, and I'm not, a European. I mean, of European descent, sure, but I don't live in Europe. Scottish descent, but I don't live in Scotland or Germany. Well, German descent as well. What I would do, or if I was advising him, I would explain to him, you are in like I said, a very dire situation economically and militarily. The war cannot be won through military force that Ukraine currently possesses or will ever possess. It has enough men to drag the war on for maybe 1 to 2 more years, if I had to guess. Ultimately, though, it is a war of attrition, and Russia will win a war of attrition. Now, Ukraine can extend the war. It can give Russia some bloody noses. It can kill more Russian soldiers, but ultimately, there is no way for it to win the war, other than possibly to drag the entire world into this conflagration as well. Now, I know one of the goals of Zelenskyy, and this is just for survival, has been to try to pull European powers into this war, to try to get nuclear weapons, to find a way to stop the Russian army and push them out of the areas that it currently occupies. That's not possible. It would take upwards of, I'd say, millions of men because people have to consider too, if the European powers were ever actually to directly intervene in this war, say Germany mobilized a few 100,000 men, France, the UK, they brought in their tanks and aircraft, Russia would immediately mobilize. And that mobilization would be a popular mobilization. Now, keep in mind, they're getting plenty of volunteers still to this day. I don't know the exact number, but the last I saw, it was roughly 30,000 men a month. Now, whether they're still getting that many volunteers, I don't know. Now, they're losing men on the front lines, but not enough to dissuade people from volunteering to fight. They haven't had to do a second mobilization. Now, if Europe were to mobilize and intervene in this war, Russia would immediately mobilize again. And I don't think there would be much of a resistance to it. I think Russians would sign up to fight because, again, like I don't really think Europeans understand this, is the will to fight amongst the European populace, the general European populace, the will to fight any kind of war is abysmally low. They don't know what they're defending. They don't know if they have a nation left to defend. They don't know what values they're sticking up for, and they don't want to fight for European leaders that have a sub 30% approval rating. The Russians, on the other hand, though, and I could say the same thing about the Ukrainians, is they are willing to fight a war. They are willing to sign up. I would say more. I'd say the Russians are far less war weary as of right now than the Ukrainians, but it's a spirit that has largely been extinguished in Western Europe. And if faced with the threat of a wider European war, Russia will mobilize. It would put millions of men under arms, no matter if it's economically damaging or not. They will put millions of men, bring millions of men into their military. The Europeans just, they can't do that. Russia can still mobilize more men than I think all the European countries combined, or they would have a much easier time doing it than the other European powers combined. So even if Zelenskyy were to pull in other European powers into this war, into a direct confrontation with Russia, it's not going to cause the Russians to back down. It's just going to cause a wider another European conflagration that's going to kill millions of people. I don't see any other outcome to this. I think European leaders seem to be a bit deluded in regards to Russian military capabilities. On one hand, they say that the Ukrainians are all that's holding back this tsunami, this Russian tide that would roll over Europe. On the other hand, they say the Russian army is a joke and it's debilitated. Well, the truth is, no, it's not a joke. Yes, they've lost upwards, at least from what I saw, 95,000 men. That was one of the lists released. Give or take 20,000. I'd say it's probably higher. Those are very, very heavy losses, but not crippling losses, at least not to the Russians. They've lost a lot of equipment. I'd say a few thousand tanks and APCs at this point. But people need to keep in mind they still have massive stockpiles of tanks and armored vehicles, more than the European countries combined. And now they also have more combat experience than any other European power, except for maybe the Ukrainians. The two most experienced armies on this planet are the AFU and the Russian armed forces. Those are the two most powerful, most experienced and battle-hardened militaries on this planet. The rest of Europe just simply doesn't know how to fight at this point. They haven't fought in a long time. So I think Zelenskyy would need to consider that as, would it even matter if Europe was pulled into this war? Do they even have the capability of doing anything? Because I think a lot of Europeans prior to Donald Trump's election were counting on eventually things would get bad enough to where Joe Biden would direct some kind of, would bumble into some sort of direct military confrontations with the Russians. Because frankly, if you're Zelenskyy and your goal is to retake retake all of Ukraine, including Crimea, from the Russians, it would have to cause World War III. You would have to start World War III to pull that off, because the amount of military material and men that would have to enter that theater to pull that off against the Russians would, by default, it would be World War III. It would have to be World War III. And it wouldn't just be the Russians involved. I mean, it would spread through the Middle East. Russia would pull in its regional allies. Iran would probably be involved. North Korea would probably start sending more arms. I mean, this whole thing would spiral into a catastrophe for what? To save 20% of Ukraine's land that it's not getting back anyways. He needs to come to the understanding that the world is not willing to sacrifice at large their sons, their daughters, their husbands, their brothers to this cause, especially when it would kill millions upon millions upon millions of people. There really isn't a way for Zelenskyy to recapture this territory. It's either concessions need to be made or it's World War III. Those are the only two options that he has. I don't, with the behavior that I see, I don't see President Zelenskyy coming to that conclusion, at least publicly. I know that the Ukrainian nationalists wouldn't stand for it. They're willing to fight to the bitter end, which isn't surprising. They're Slavs. It seems to be a cultural thing in Eastern Europe. There's a much stronger will to fight. And they're much less sensitive to military losses, I think, than the Western world generally is. And I think that mindset has become pretty apparent in Ukrainian leadership. There's idealism, not realism. We must throw out the invaders at all costs. Even if it's impossible, even if it leads to the demise of our country, it's either all or nothing. And I think at this stage in the war, it's a lost cause. In my personal opinion, I think it's a lost cause. And I think Zelenskyy needs to be advised to either step down or face reality. Now, I don't know if he can publicly face reality because of the repercussions he might face from nationalists and Ukrainian government. I think his only option, really, if he would wish to survive, say if he does decide to pull the plug on this war, would be to flee. Because I think he's going to get couped by one side or the other. Either the nationalists are going to coup him eventually, or I think the Ukrainians that wish to save what they have left are going to coup him. But it's hard to say at this point. I don't know. Now, moving on to President Donald Trump. Well, it's clear that his peace initiatives seem to be, I don't want to say out of reach. I think there's still a good chance of some kind of détente, some kind of decent relationship with Russia and the United States now at this point, despite the fact that Europe, again, seems to be absolutely hell-bent on destroying itself. That doesn't mean we have to be involved. We're not obligated to be involved this time. This isn't 1938. We can't perpetually live in 1938. I think the best thing for President Trump to do would be make his position very clear on where he stands, with this war, is that it needs to end. We don't want to extend it. We don't want to drag this out any longer. The aid will stop, and wait to see what the Europeans can even do. Because frankly, it doesn't look like the Europeans have the capability to extend this war much longer. Many of their leaders are already very unpopular. They're sitting at 30% approval ratings. Economically, Europe has been struggling since it's cut itself off from Russian energy. And they can't continue this war much longer. So if the peace process is indeed sabotaged by the Europeans, I think Trump's best option would be to wait and see. Pull the United States away from Europe and see what they could even do, which is probably nothing. No offense to the Europeans, but I think Europe never really socially or economically they may have recovered, but never really socially or culturally recovered from World War II. They've been under the subjugation of the United States ever since the end of World War II, to where I don't really think the Europeans, they don't really understand statecraft. There's no real European statesmen. I mean, they're all bureaucrats. They don't really understand how to interact on the international stage. They don't know decorum. They don't know how to form alliances. They don't know how to do anything other than threaten and berate and moralize. That's not an effective way to behave on the world stage. And I don't think they're going to be able to pull anything together meaningful to actually help Ukraine, because keep in mind, too, they're all fighting with each other. There are several European leaders that are a bit more realistic about the outcome to this war. And they hold some serious reservations on whether or not this should even continue. I believe it was a few weeks ago they had some kind of conference, quote, peace conference, and from what I read, they all started arguing with each other and fighting with each other as soon as the conference started on, should they send direct military aid to Ukraine? Should this even continue? There's certain European countries, nations within the EU that are being completely excluded from any of these peace talks because they are not for any kind of European intervention. There's no united European voice. I think without the United States and without the United States' financial and military support, I don't think there's much Europe can do other than make grandiose statements. I think President Trump's really only option, if he cannot get the Ukrainians to make any kind of settlement and concessions with Russia, is unfortunately he's going to have to let the war drag on for a bit longer and then try again once things get even worse for the Ukrainians. That's an unfortunate reality. I'm sure that's not nice to hear, but I don't think as of right now Trump can force the Ukrainians to stop fighting in the timetable that he wants them to. He can't force the Europeans to stop at least trying to send the Ukrainians aid in the time frame that he wants to. I think this is going to be a much longer process to finally end this war, or at least come to terms with the fact that this war is over. Now, moving on to the European leaders, what can they do? How should they be advised to proceed? There is really nothing they could do. Again, from like a realistic standpoint, economically, Europe isn't in a good place. They're very dependent on imports, specifically energy imports. Having an antagonistic relationship with Russia when it's dependent on energy imports was never a good idea. Again, Europe is not run by people that are realistic about running nations. They're bureaucrats and ideologues. That's why they all have sub 30% approval ratings, is because they don't know how to talk to their own electorate. They don't know how to address the needs of their own countries. They view these nations, the kind of nations that make up Europe, as like an ideological project. They have this grand vision of the European Union essentially being, a grand extension of the rules-based order, the perfect society where everyone lives together and human rights abound, and it's harmony and peace, and everyone holds hands and sings Kumbaya, and there's no discrimination, there's no racial tension, there's no cultural tension. It's been a disaster. That's not how Europe works. The entire continent is rife with ethnic tensions and cultural tensions at this point, largely because of the policies of European bureaucrats. They have their own mess to sort out. I would say for the betterment of Europe, that the Ukraine project needs to be abandoned, and there needs to be some kind of new security arrangement made with the Eastern European nations, specifically Russia, if Europe is to remain economically viable. But again, because they're so ideologically invested in Project Ukraine, I don't think they can pull themselves away from it. I think they need to address the immigration issues and the cultural issues and the economic issues in their countries. Ask themselves, why are all of our approval ratings below 30%? Why does our populace generally hate us, and why is Europe drifting slowly towards nationalism? It's in response to the policies of European leaders over the past 20 or 30 years, but they need to have a moment of reckoning and recognize the fact that this grand project has failed. This grand project of bringing Russia to heel and breaking it up into small independent republics failed miserably. Again, the reason it failed is because these people don't understand how nations and societies work. They come up with grandiose plans on some chalkboard somewhere and tell themselves that due to their own intellectual prowess and unassailable genius, that these ideas will work. that they'll be able to come up with some convoluted plot so advanced that once it's unleashed, everything will take place in accordance with their design, which it won't. Now, moving on, what do I think President Vladimir Putin of Russia should do in this situation? Well, he has the least to do, I think, other than what he's already doing, which is nothing. Continue the war on at the pace that it is. Keep grinding through the Ukrainian military and wait for them to finally capitulate. Now, I think one of the reasons Russia has not fully engaged itself militarily with this conflict is I do believe that President Putin was waiting to see what President Trump could offer. What could he pull off? Could he bring Ukraine to the table? Because keep in mind, yes, it is true that Russia has stated more than once that it's willing to negotiate. But it's negotiating from a realistic position, and it's not going to cut its own legs off, especially now that it has the initiative and the advantage. Now, Russia did come to the table in April of 2022 with the peace agreement in Istanbul, which essentially would have allowed Ukraine to keep most of its territorial sovereignty. Now, it only moved into the position that it is in now in regards to keeping the four oblasts in response to those peace talks failing, and Ukraine adamantly insisting that it will not negotiate with Vladimir Putin. I think at that point, that's when Russia decided to annex those territories, which was an incredibly stupid decision on Ukraine's part, because now it's never getting those lands back. And I'm sure they were told that repeatedly by military experts that aren't part of the European or American bureaucracy. So now, though, that it appears at least possible that Europe will keep this war going regardless, or at least going for as long as it can, regardless of America exiting the war. If I was advising, President Putin and his objective was to win the war, now actually might be the time to engage more of the Russian military in ending this war at a faster pace, possibly. So like I said, he could continue on at the current pace, hoping that this rate of attrition will cause Ukrainian military to collapse without American support within a year or two, or he could rip the Band-Aid off and just, I guess, finish the job militarily. But then one of the problems with that is, that seeing a grand Russian victory and seeing a rejuvenated and powerful Russian military roll through Ukraine might incense the Europeans even more, where that might be the time where they just say, okay, let's just wing it, because, again, like, that might fulfill this idea that they have that, Ukraine is all that's stopping Russia from rolling through Europe. And now if they see a resurgent and powerful Russian military, much more powerful than they assume that it was, which it is much more powerful than they assume that it is, but if they come to that realization of, oh my gosh, look, they are going to rule through Europe, we have to do something now, that at that point they might do something drastic and stupid in regards to Moscow. But I think for now, I would say that given President Putin's patience, I think that Russia will continue the war on as it has been for the past 2 years. A slow, methodical grinding through eastern Ukraine until the AFU finally falls apart and capitulates. But it is also looking more and more likely that Europe and Ukraine are willing now to fight to the bitter end. So it may be time for the Russians to make that final push to end the war, or at least make the outcome of the war look completely beyond doubt to even the most delusional Europeans. But I guess we'll see. I guess we'll find out. But anyways, that's all for today. This is the first video I've made in a while, so I hope everyone liked the format here. This is kind of what I want to continue to do moving forward, is take a situation, like a current geopolitical situation, and talk about what I think the leaders involved in that geopolitical situation should do to get the most desired outcome. Now, some people might watch this video and think, oh, well, I was biased, in favor of, say, the United States' position or Russia's position. I'm just a realist. I don't come in here with any kind of political agenda or cheering for one side or the other. I'm not an ideologue when it comes to geopolitics. Again, as I've said before, I'm a realist in regards to these things. I'm not going to get up here and champion the rules-based order or, the resistance, so to speak, that's starting to grow against that order. It's just, again, I like talking about geopolitics and what I think different leaders should do. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please leave me a like and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to try to, at least as of right now, put 2 videos out a week, and then we'll go from there. If I get some more free time, then I would gladly do more. Have a great day.